Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and I'm very happy to welcome back Harold Davis. Hey Harold.
Hi there, Nicole.
We are happy to have him back, and this session is going to be all about creative landscape photography. Harold is a professional photographer, very well known, and the author of many best-selling photography books. He's a popular workshop leader, an Adobe influencer, a Moab master, and a Zeiss Lens ambassador, and we are thrilled to have him back here for a second session with Topaz.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Nicole. Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I'm very proud and happy to be with everyone here today. As Nicole says, I am a professional photographer, also a writer, and it's my great pleasure to present a show related to Topaz software because Topaz tends to be my go-to software on almost every image that I create. I'm going to start this presentation with some display of my images because this is something of a holistic approach to things because it says creative landscape photography. Well, you don't get to the point where you're doing post-production and using Topaz software until you have a photo or photos to start with. So I'm going to start by showing some photos and talking about some of the issues, both technical in terms of things like exposure and also a little bit of concept of how I got to the place, how I took these photos and what they mean. And then I'm going to continue and discuss a little about how I use the Topaz software, and then we'll move into a section of working through some actual examples. I have as many examples as people want of Topaz software because I use the various Topaz modules on almost everything I do. Finally, as Nicole said, there'll be a question and answer session at the end, and please throw everything you've got at me. So regarding the slide that you see there, the way I go about this in terms of post-production is I make my photos, and when I'm in location, I think hard about what I'm going to want to do at the end, what my post-production and creative effects are going to be, so that I can be sure to have all the pieces that I'm going to want. And that might be single photos, or a single photo, or single photos, or in many cases a bracketed sequence. So I process the photos using raw conversion or HDR. I tweak the images from a photographic perspective mostly for things like exposure, saturation, contrast, and so on. And then I apply creative effects at the end. Incidentally, speaking of creative effects, this is a old train bridge in Maine, and it kind of looks, if you look closely at it, like there's a train coming down the tracks. But actually, if you had a magnifying glass and could see the image close up, you'd see that that's a selfie. I am on the tracks there. Why do it? The sense I have, and what I like to think, is that digital photography is a new art form. So it's one part photography, one part digital painting, and one part creative imagination. The digital painting and creative imagination part of this comes from software like Photoshop and like the Topaz plugins. So that's why Topaz is so important to what I do. As one of my collectors put it, what I really am is a digital painter, and I use photos as my source material, and as I've been saying, Topaz is one of my most important tools for this. The people look at some of what I do, like this bridge over the Dordogne River in the southwest of France, and they say, well, this looks very painterly in part. And yes, it looks painterly, and that's because of the oil paint filter in Topaz Simplify. With this photo, a very early morning high up in the mountains of rural Japan, a field still being farmed in the old-fashioned way, it combines a painterly effect to add some softness and a harder effect to add some definition down in the rice fields that you see on the right of the image. Both things are, as you'll see, added using Topaz filters. So I'm going to run through some images fairly quickly, but what I've said is kind of true about all of them. How do you get the painterly effect that you see in the sky of this image from Lembert Dome in the Sierra Nevada mountains? Well, you get it by painting in a bit of again, an oil paint filter from Topaz Simplify, or one of the other options in Topaz Simplify. What I like to do is to, particularly with an image like this, if you paint in something at 100%, it's going to look a bit phony. So I don't like things to look too phony. I like to keep people guessing how much of it is real. Wasn't there an advertising campaign like that? What is real? What is not? Well, I like things to be on that edge, one side or another. They could be real. This is the Gem El Fana, the great marketplace in Marrakesh, Morocco. And once again, this is an image I think I have as one of the examples I've prepared for this webinar, so you can see a little more later on about how I set it up. But once again, this is it has a photographic look, but it has added definition through the wood cut filter in Topaz Simplify, and through a couple of the Topaz Adjust filters, and also one of the Topaz Glow filters. So something like this view at night of Bethesda Fountain in New York Central Park is a very stagey look, but it's also fairly real. And once again, it's a filtered effect. The point I'm getting at is that what I aim for is that something that many people who don't know too much better say looks like photography, but you really have to look a little harder to see the twist on it, to see that there's something that looks a little like a lithograph or an oil painting, and then it's been added in using one of the many effects that you get out of the Topaz filters. So, as I said, I like to be on both sides of the is it a photo line. This flower taken with a telephoto lens definitely has a painterly look to it, and I used a couple of the different Topaz filters to get that painterly effect. But something like this, you also have to start with an interesting photographic image. So I'm not somebody who is saying fix it in post-production. I'm saying get the pieces you need using photographic technique and do it correctly in the camera using photography, and then in post-production take what you've done, and to get something really special, take it one step further. And as you do that, you get images like this one using painterly effects out of Topaz Adjust. This is a river in Kyoto, Japan, that on the right side it looks much more like a painting, and on the left side it looks rather more photographic. Then again, the background of this image of a church in the southwest of France is put together using Topaz Impression, yet another one of the various filter packs that Topaz makes available, and that gives it a very painterly, brush-like quality, particularly up in the sky. So these are a series of long exposure images, and I'm going to come back to them in a second, that have to do with photography, but I'll look at them in the context of exposure in a minute. When I say life is an illusion, I'm making a joke. What I'm saying is that you cannot actually photograph the real anyhow. By definition, a photograph is not of something real, and a good place to look at that is in panorama photos, which are stitched together, because that's a little bit more like the way we see the world. And getting back to how you make landscape photos that are worth working on in post-production, here's my three-point plan. Make a plan, research it, talk to people, have adventures. So that's my 2 cents on how you get good photos in the first place. What, by the way, is a landscape photo? Well, just about anything, as long as it's not a close-up of a piece of jewelry or a car. But looking out an open window at a church in a town in France, that's a landscape. A bridge is a landscape. Rainbows are certainly a landscape. And I'm going to emphasize that every single image I've shown in this presentation is substantially worked on, enhanced using the Topaz tools. This is the Grand Mosque in Marrakesh, in Casablanca, Morocco. So if you're going to expose a single image, this is a long exposure, about 10 minutes of a seascape at dusk, shown in Adobe Camera Raw. You have within that single raw exposure a huge range of exposure possibilities. So this is the same image as before, shown in Adobe Camera Raw at -3 f-stops. Here it is on the default setting, -3 f-stops, +3 f-stops. So that's a huge exposure range. What do you do with those exposure ranges? And I should say right now, if you're a Lightroom user rather than a Adobe Camera Raw user, that doesn't really matter. It's the same engine beneath Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw. You just make a virtual copy in Lightroom and you do the same thing. So you put the different exposures you have in the raw file together and you make a blended combination like this one. Here's an example of another way to go about exposing a landscape. This is a marketplace in Morocco, and there are 4 exposures shown here in this strip, ranging from 0.6 of a second to 5 seconds. Here they are. And when you process something like this, the way I usually do that is I use a bit of an HDR blend of the photos, and then I paint in appropriate parts of the layers on top of that. And then once I paint in those layers, as you can see, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers there. I merge down the layers, I create a new version of it, and then I start applying the effects I want. This list shows the Topaz programs that I most often use to get the effects in landscapes that I like. And I almost always apply them selectively. The code word I use for that is homeopathic post-production. Use only a pinch. So the idea of homeopathy is that you take something that will poison you if you use all of it, and you use a small amount of it. That's what I like to do with post-production, whatever the technique is. I like to control how much I use. And I also like to always go in 2 directions. So if I'm going to use something, and I have a number of examples of this coming up, if I'm going to use something like the filters in Topaz Simplify that are painterly, like the Buzz Sim filter or the oil paint filter, then I'm also going to use something that will harden things up and give it an outline. And that's true in almost all the images that I've shown. I'm coming toward the end of the slide part of this presentation, but I want to point out that while there's a great black and white conversion program that is part of the Topaz collection, it's called Black and White Effects, there are also a whole bunch of interesting black and white painterly effects that are hidden inside other aspects of the Topaz collection, such as Adjust and Simplify. There's a black and white oil painting filter, for example, and I mentioned the woodcut filter. Many of the images here have black and white conversion that is enhanced by using these filters. I could not get the effects you're seeing in these images without the Topaz collections. I'm going to present a manifesto here for a second, which is that whatever you do with photography and digital art, there needs to be an aesthetic of quality, grace, and style. You know, this is not something that we as practitioners of photography and art in this wonderful world where digital is coming alive can just throw stuff out there. We have to be careful about what we do, whether it's in making books or making prints or portfolios or whatever we do. it's always appropriate to be careful about how you present work. And in that score, here am I creating a portfolio. Here's one of my landscape photos printed on kozo washi from Japan, and an advertisement for an upcoming destination travel photo workshop that I have next year. And here's information about how you can contact me, my blog, my workshops. If you want to write me an email about photography, I love getting email, and I try to respond to every photographic related email that I get. Let's turn to some examples. I have here a fairly finished version of this program, and you can see in the Photoshop layers palette over here that it's got a woodcut filter from Simplify and an oil paint filter from Simplify applied in two different ways. So let me take these off and let's look at what they are. Essentially a high grain, dirty almost definition and high definition. And I don't say dirty in a bad way. I say dirty, that's what this filter is intended to do, and that's part of why you're not going to apply it at high percentages of opacity. So here it is, and what I've done is I apply it at using a layer mask, and you can see what the layer mask looks like. So I'm not sure how well that's coming across on your screens, but you can see that what I've done is I've selectively painted in the parts of it that you want to have more definition, namely the leaves down here, but you don't want to do that in the fog because you want the fog to be nice and soft, and you don't want to do it up in the wisteria leaves up here. Then the next thing I have up here is a painterly effect, which blurs things. So when I was talking about the thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis, you can see the sharpening and the blurring come together here. You see how beautiful and nice this oil paint filter is. It's very sensuous. But if you present it like that, you're presenting something that honestly looks more like a watercolor than an oil painting, but it looks like a nice soft painting. And then the third layer I have on here is simply to paint in a little additional oil paint on particular areas where I want it. And again, this is on the wisteria part because you want more of that and you don't want to have it overall. So let me shut this down and let's go to how that looked originally. Okay, so here is this image before any of the Topaz filters are applied to it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it so that I have a copy. Then I'm going to put it onto a tab. So here we have the copy, and if I go into Topaz Simplify, you can see some of the filters that I'm playing with. For example, that the wood carving filter that I've been mentioning looks like that on the screen. Sometimes when you look at this area that you see down here, you may want to lighten it before you apply it, so you can go into the Adjust panel and you can boost the brightness if you want like that. You can also take a look at other kinds of edging on an image that add definition in black and white, like the pencil hard one, or you can go and try a color image on it, which this looks a little bit garish, but once again, a little bit of the color on the wisteria like this could be quite wonderful. Another area where you'll find a number of really good black and white kinds of options are on the line and ink menu. With something like this, you might want to go and take the brightness down a bit. And there are quite a few other possible options that are quite wonderful, really. So in terms of painting, on the painting menu, uh, what I often use are oil painting like this, which is the one that I showed in this example. And here you might want to boost the brightness a little, make it a little brighter. And there are a whole bunch of other possibilities along here. So here's a second oil painting one, and there are oil painting ones that have toned colors, and there's a colorful kind of painting. What you can also find for getting this nice soft look that I love to use in many of my images are this Buzz Sim filter is really a wonderful thing. So let's say I apply this Buzz Sim filter like this to my duplicate image. I hit OK. And then I'm going to move my images back off the tab and float them in Windows. So I've got my copy that's nice and soft like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it over the original like that. And I'm going to shut the copy. So now I have my background layer. And I have a copy of it over it, which has Buzz Sim on it. And I have found it's really surprisingly important to name your layers carefully when you do this kind of thing, because as you'll see if we have time, when I get to more complicated examples than this one, sometimes I can have as many as 5 or 6 layers with various Topaz effects on them. And it's easier for me to see what I'm doing and to fix them if they're not right, if I've labeled them and I know what they are. So I'm going to put a hide all layer mask on that. I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to set my brush to 50% flow so I can control the flow and about 30% opacity. And I'm going to make it just big enough that I can get the wisteria between the branches, but not. And you see how beautiful and how pretty the wisteria is now coming in when you add a touch of softness to it instead of making it the sort of hard delineated thing. At the same time, you've got the beams on this arbor, and you don't really want to make the beams get any more outlined than they are because they're outlined enough. If you look at the layer mask that I've created, there it is. So that's the part I painted in. And let's say I feel that I've gone too far in painting this in, because sometimes I go too far. Well, then I just dial down the opacity of the layer. I take it down to, say, 42%. 42, as anybody who's a Doug Adams fan knows, is a very important number. So, okay, let's move on to another example. This one that is called original is the way that this country road in France, a bit washed out, but not a bad image, came in through the default setting in either Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, so keep that in mind. Then what I did was I ran it through Topaz Adjust, which you see here, and I chose the summer preset, and it looked like this. So it's much yellower. Then I applied the Summer Adjust preset to the original image, but at 50% opacity, as you can see over here on the layers palette. I then took what we had, and I put the black and white oil painting 2 filter or preset from Simplify on top of it to make a nice black and white version of this image. So let me run through those steps. Make it a little bigger. I'm going to go layer, duplicate layer. I'm going to run Topaz Adjust on it. And let's see if we can find summer on here. There's summer. I'm going to, without making much in the way of adjusting on the many controls that you have over in the global adjustments and local adjustments, I'm going to just apply it. So this is now summer. Okay. And I put the opacity to, well, we're going with 42%. Let's go with 42% from general principles. Then I flatten the image. Let me go image, duplicate. I'm going to put it on a tab, and I've got my copy here. I'm going to apply, simplify, and here's oil paint black and white too. As you can see as you roll through this, there are a lot of other options, but that looks like a pretty good one to me. Part of what I sometimes do is I look through and I say, hey, what's really going to work here? And you know, there's a lot of playing around you can do. So that was a fairly fast conversion of this image, which was an okay original, but probably not one of my greatest works, into something that is really a very stunning and interesting black and white image. Okay, let's move on. So part of what's interesting about this for me as a piece of post-production, this is a path along the Rhine River in Germany. Part of what's interesting to me is that the painterly effects on top come from Topaz Impression, which is quite an interesting and marvelous piece of software. So you can see that from what I started with, there are 6 different layers. Let's go through them in order, or let's go back to the original image and let's have some fun with it. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to duplicate this image, and I'm going to put the image and its duplicate on tabs. Okay, so the first thing we've got here is a wood carving layer. And you know, personally, I really like the way that wood carving layer looks just by itself as an image, but it's not what this image is intended to be. What we need is a pinch of this to add a little bit of definition to the original image. So I'm going to put this back all to float in Windows one more time. I paint it across. I put a layer mask on top of it, layer mask, hide all. And I'm going to paint in some of the parts of it that might like a little more definition, like the path seems to call for some more definition. And let's paint some tree trunks. I like painting in tree trunks to have a lot of definition. You know, leaves and foliage should be soft and sensuous and warm. Tree trunks should be something where there's high definition. So this is what my layer mask looks like. And let's go back to the duplicate here. And I'm going to back up, and I'm going to put both this and the duplicate on a tab again. And I'm going to apply simplify again with let's do adjust instead. We're going to apply adjust, and we're going to look for Venice. Since I'm going to Venice next week, what an appropriate thing to look for, but I think it's on the stylized tab, not where I was. Yeah, painting Venice. Yeah, I'm very excited because I'm leading a group of photographers through Italy starting next week. I'm flying to Italy on Monday, so if I'm thinking of painting Venice, I can be forgiven. Here we go. I'm applying Venice to it, and there you go. I'm going to put it back into floating windows just because putting it in floating windows is easier for me to manage the layer creation. That's the only reason I'm going back and forth there. And so I have wood on that one and Venice on this one. And I put a hide all layer mask on top. Layer mask, hide all. And let me paint in some Venice painting on the nice leaves here. I'm going to do it at a little bit higher opacity than I would probably do it in real life so that the point will really come through. The water could use some Venice too. That's very Venetian to have it on water, right? Okay, I think that's an improvement already. Let's go back to our Venice here. Let's back it out so Venice isn't implied. And let me go and run this through Topaz Impression so you can get a sense of what I had in mind with that. So the interface for Topaz Impression and for Topaz Glow for that matter, and a couple of the other Topaz ones, is a little bit different than the filter interface, because what you do is you select a preset from the list of presets on the right, and then you use the controls up above to choose to modify it, in particular things like put it on a background that one might like. So I want to choose a painterly effect here of some kind. Let's see, maybe I can, I can just pre-select that here. And when it catches up with me, let's choose a good one. They're all good. Let's choose a good one. Oh, it's totally inappropriate, but let's go with Degas Dancers. Totally inappropriate name, but appropriate setting. So if you look here, you'll see all the brush stroke, brush size, that kind of thing. Let me up the brush size a bit. And then down towards the bottom of this, you can choose a texture canvas, colored canvas, anything you'd like here. Let's put it on paper, like that. And then I'm going to click OK. So you can see that you've got a really nice painterly version of the image now on this copy of it. So once again, I'm going to copy it back and forth, and we're going to call this Impression Degas, because that's kind of what it is. And I'm going to blend it in. I'm not going to use a layer mask this time. I'm going to blend it in at, 42%. What a good number. Keep in mind that you're not stuck with normal blending mode. You can blend in your effects using something like overlay if you prefer, which creates a very different look. I like that one. If you experiment with the Topaz filters, I really recommend you check out Clarity and Glow also, because they've got some just absolutely marvelous effects in them for many kinds of images. What we show is who we are, and I think maybe I'm starting to come to that point, but I certainly don't want to stop learning, and there's a lot more to learn.
And thank you so much, Harold. This has been awesome, and I hope to have you back.
Nicole, thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I've had a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed the questions, and I sure hope you do have me back.
If you want to follow Harold, check out some of his workshops, where he's going, and check out all the books that he has authored, you can go to digitalfieldguide.com. And on Facebook, you can follow him at davis.harold. If you have any questions that we weren't able to get to today, you can contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com. We'll try to get to as many as those, or get to those as quickly as possible. So thank you again, Harold. This has been great. And everybody, I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us. Bye, Harold.
Bye.